the archive, Katy Sternberger. How are you doing today?
Doing well, thank you.
Good, good. So we're here at the Portsmouth Athenaeum. So what do you do here over at the Athenaeum?
So my name is Katy Sternberger, and I'm currently the archivist here at the Portsmouth Athenaeum. And I earned my bachelor's degree in English and journalism from the University of New Hampshire, and I minored in French and history as well. And then I earned my master's degree in archives management from Simmons University, and I'm also a certified archivist through the Academy of Certified Archivists. So one of my favorite aspects of being an archivist is preparing archival resources for research use. And I also enjoy doing my own research in the archives and look forward to sharing one of my recent projects with you today. So we're coming to you today from the Historic Library at the Portsmouth Athenaeum, which is in the heart of Market Square in Portsmouth, New Hampshire. The word Athenaeum is derived from Athena, the Greek goddess of wisdom. And the Portsmouth Athenaeum was founded in 1817 as a membership library, and that's a kind of library where members pool their resources, collect their books, and share information. And Benjamin Franklin actually contributed to the popularization of membership libraries in the 18th century, and the idea spread worldwide. But of the thousands of membership libraries that thrived in the 19th century, fewer than 20 survive. So the Athenaeum is a really unique place. It's a center of the intellectual center for the community, and we preserve and share our local history, and we welcome everyone who is interested in seeking knowledge.
So one of your recent projects, you were talking about inoculations a few hundred years ago. Is this a process that's still used to this day?
Yes, so before vaccinations, which we're familiar with today, especially just coming out of the COVID-19 pandemic, there were inoculations. And so the practice of inoculation developed in Asia and Africa, and it was used there for centuries. And then it didn't arrive here in North America until 1721. And so Cotton Mather, the Puritan minister from Boston, had actually learned of the technique from Onesimus, who was an enslaved man from Africa. And throughout the 18th century, there were a number of smallpox epidemics that struck the Boston area and included Portsmouth. And so now smallpox caused serious scarring, and it came up to a fatality rate of nearly 30%. So quarantine and inoculation were the only methods available at that time to control the disease. And it was not until 1796 that Edward Jenner had developed the smallpox vaccine. And Lyman Spalding was a physician from Portsmouth who actually brought the vaccination process locally in 1800.
Wow, that's great. So, in case of people at home might have not heard of an inoculation, that is the process when someone takes a live infection specimen and delivers it to somebody who's not infected at a low dose when somebody can develop an immunity, much like a vaccine that we use today.
Yeah, so with the smallpox inoculation, a small sample of the live virus is inserted into a scratch in the skin, and the person would become infected, but it was generally a milder form of the virus, and then the person would have immunity against it from future infection. And so even though the inoculation process meant people were purposely infecting themselves with smallpox, which was kind of a scary illness, it killed lots of people at that time, they tended to fare much better than if they had caught the disease naturally. However, vaccination against smallpox was different because it used a related but less severe virus called cowpox, and that provided immunity against smallpox.
So in your article, you talked a little bit also about a hospital being developed right off on an island in Portsmouth. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Sure. So we have some pretty amazing documentation about an island hospital that was set up off the coast of Portsmouth to inoculate people against smallpox. And 4 local physicians received permission from the town to build a hospital on Hensel's Island in 1782. And from the Athenaeum's archives, we have this small ledger kept by Dr. Joshua Brackett, who recorded information about people inoculated on the island. So Hensel's Island is what we now call Shapley Island. It's located near Pierce Island on the road to Newcastle. And we know this because there's actually a French map of Portsmouth from 1782, same year as the ledger, and it shows the hospital on Hensel's Island. And so this map is available from the Library of Congress, and it depicts the locations of the French fleet around Portsmouth during the American Revolution, as well as including this hospital.
Documented, do we understand what a trip to a hospital or that hospital might have been like at that time?
Yes. According to the 1782 French map, Hensel's Island was connected to Pierce Island by a bridge, and Pierce Island was in turn connected to mainland Portsmouth by another bridge. And the map showed that there were 3 buildings that made up the hospital. So the physicians would have administered the smallpox inoculations, and then medications were administered, presumably to alleviate the symptoms caused by the virus during that quarantine period. And so Dr. Brackett's ledger includes data about the number of pills given, and it appears that nearly all patients on Hensel's Island received 7 pills, which came in different sizes. And in addition, patients received a cathartic, which was meant to purge the body of the disease. And so each Hensel's Island patient received 4 doses of this purgative substance. And it almost assuredly was not a pleasant experience, but inoculation was done under the doctor's supervision, and it might have helped to allay people's fears about contracting more serious illness, and then they would have immunity after going through this process.
Okay. And do we know what happened to the hospital?
So we don't know exactly what happened to the hospital, other than that it was documented on the French map from 1782, but the islands around the Portsmouth area were used as other epidemics came and went over, the last 250 years or so. And so there was another island that was used called Pest Island, which is very near where Hensel's Island is. So we do know that periodically hospitals would come and go as waves of different viruses came and went through the Portsmouth area. So they continued to use this quarantine process on islands off the coast of Portsmouth.
Oh, okay. So would hospitals be like, people would make a very specific building, like one would be erected and people would decide, okay, this is going to be a hospital? Would these be impromptu buildings, like they would take someone's house or a church?
I think in general they were kind of purpose-built hospitals. Okay. We don't have too much documentation about how that process went, but we do know that these 4 physicians in 1782 had requested permission from the town to build a hospital on Hensel's Island, specifically for use during this particular smallpox epidemic.
All right. Now, were smallpox epidemics frequent throughout the 1700s?
There were a number of smallpox epidemics that occurred throughout the 1700s. So, there were a number of outbreaks in the Boston area in particular, and one of the physicians who helped create the Hensel's Island Hospital had actually had some experience in 1764 where he was treating patients from the Boston area on a different island off the coast of Massachusetts. And we do know that there were other hospitals that were set up off of islands in the New England area.
All right, so speaking of physicians, you did in the article write about people who were licensed, and it was kind of funny to hear that it was a $30 fine for people who administered an inoculation not licensed. So what was that licensed or certified process at that time like?
Yeah, so there was a real threat of people transmitting the smallpox virus after inoculation and causing infection amongst people who had no immunity yet. And so it was important that a licensed person oversee the procedure. And we have access to a newspaper clipping from the New Hampshire Gazette that announces a 1776 act by the state of New Hampshire to prevent the spread of smallpox. And so this act forbade people from inoculating themselves or others without a license. And so this license could come from the General Assembly, which we know today as the General Court, our state legislature, or there was a Committee of Safety, which in New Hampshire was established in 1775, and it was a governing body formed by local officials counter to the provincial government set up under British authority. And also town selectmen could grant the license. On top of that, 2 justices of the peace from the applicant's neighboring towns had to approve that license as well. So it sounds like it was a really formalized kind of process, and the fact that there was a 30-pound fine for performing the inoculation procedure without a license, I think that speaks to the fact that it was a pretty significant deterrent at that time. That would have been a pretty hefty sum, and it's evident that the state was taking this outbreak really seriously.
Do we know what the quarantine process might have been like at that time?
People who were inoculated were still sick with smallpox and could spread the disease, which could be devastating to those without immunity yet. So after receiving the inoculation, patients had to quarantine. And what better place to quarantine than on an island? So doctors set up hospitals on various islands throughout the Boston area and right here in Portsmouth as well. And patients inoculated against smallpox stayed there for at least 3 weeks.
Okay, so that was a pretty serious process. Okay. Did we have do we know how like this quarantine situation might have been issued by the government at the time?
So the 4 physicians on Hensel's Island drew on their collective experience from previous smallpox outbreaks when they started their 1782 inoculation program. And so Dr. Brackett kept detailed notes in his ledger, and he listed the names of 365 people who were inoculated over the course of 3 months between March and May 1782. And he included each patient's age and residence. He also recorded the date the patients entered the hospital, the date they were discharged from the hospital, dosages of medications, and any remarks about their condition during their stay. And the patients had to quarantine on the island for a minimum of 21 days. And most patients at Hensel's Island were listed in favorable condition.
Wow. That's a very interesting process for 1700s. It's something that doesn't really come to mind. But that is pretty technical and well thought out for that time period. So does the ledger, what kind of information about some of the people that we see receiving the inoculations and being on this island, these 365, do we see a variety of people at the time?
Yeah, so we don't have any documentation as to why Dr. Brackett had kept this ledger, but we're sure glad that he did. It has a lot of useful information in it. And so people of all different backgrounds received smallpox inoculations here in Portsmouth, and I actually find it really fascinating. About 80% of the Hensel's Island patients resided in Portsmouth, but they also came from neighboring towns in New Hampshire and Massachusetts. And there were a number of children as young as 1 year, but patients were of all ages. And they included tradespeople, mariners, soldiers, merchants. Often entire families would come to receive their inoculations, and they would stay together at the island hospital during their quarantine. And even people of color were included. Several young people were called out in the ledger as black, and it included 1 child of mixed race as well. As an example, Nero was age 16 when he arrived at Hensel's Island at the hospital with the wife and children of John Pickering, and he was likely owned by the Pickering family. So more than just the medical knowledge contained in this ledger, there is a lot of genealogical value here as well. And these were real people, and it's amazing to look at their names these almost 250 years later. One other thing that I just thought I would mention is that I published a transcription of the 365 names in the ledger. and that came out in the spring 2023 issue of the New Hampshire Genealogical Record. And so that was actually a really great opportunity for me to do a close reading of all these names and pick out all the details in the ledger. And so the information in the Hensel's Island inoculation ledger is truly unique. 365 people faced uncertainty and received their inoculations in quarantine for 3 weeks on this island off the coast of Portsmouth in the spring of 1782. And this ledger helps fill gaps in our understanding of not only the 1775 to 1782 smallpox epidemic, but of the people who lived through this experience.
Yeah. Is there anything as an archivist you feel like sharing with the public as with your job?
So the Athenaeum is supported by people just like you, and anyone is welcome to become a friend of the Athenaeum. You can make a donation online at portsmouthathenaeum.org. And we also rely on volunteers to keep our organization running and to assist in providing online access to many of our archival resources like this inoculation ledger. And if you'd like to get involved, please feel free to reach out to us or simply stop by to see our beautiful historic building next time you're in downtown Portsmouth.
All right, Katie. Do you have any last words for future generations you'd like to share?
Sure. So archives are living history. Unique records like this inoculation ledger have survived the ages and are available for research use. The history is right here waiting for you, and you just need to seek it out.